The story happened to me from late July 2012 to late 2014, with ongoing issues for my safety. On that note, I would like to remain anonymous for the safety of myself. This all began late July of 2012. I come from a small town where everyone knows everyone. I had just turned 18, and as most 18-year-olds in my town, we would like to go drinking down by the beach and have a bonfire. I would have my regular group of friends who I would hang out with, and we would go for drives over to the bigger city and find things to do. I was on one of my drinking nights with a close friend of mine. We'll call him Adam. So Adam and I, we went for a drive from my parents' house in the rural area of the town and decided we wanted to go out to the big city to go watch a movie. After saying goodnight to my parents and hopping into Adam's car, we went to the movie theater and had a good time. After the movie had finished, we decided to go to McDonald's and get food. This is where I meet the man who ruined my life. He served my friend while I stood beside him at the counter, busying myself with my phone, texting friends and whatnot, while Adam placed our orders. The guy who was serving us gave me a smile, and I smiled back. As I said to my friend I was going to have a cigarette, he nodded and I went outside. Moments later, he walked out with our food, and the guy who served us was walking behind him. He came and stood next to me as he asked for a lighter and introduced himself. We shall call him Chris. So Chris sparked up a conversation and gave me his number, and he said he would like to take me out sometime for a movie or something. I agreed and made plans to see him the following weekend. After about a month of spending a lot of time with Chris and him coming out to my parents' place, we agreed to make our relationship official. He would spend most weeknights at my parents' house. I lived in a granny flat on my parents' property, and drop me off at school in the morning, to the disgust of my friends who all got taken in by the bus. One morning, after Chris had stayed over and was driving me to school, I said to him that we should pull over next to a school bus which was waiting for students to climb aboard. One of my friends was waiting next to the bus, so I stuck my head out the window and told her to climb in. This was mistake number one, introducing the two of them. A few weeks after my friend met Chris, we broke up, and it was a messy breakup. Shortly after the breakup, the scary stuff began to happen. I would hear people walking around the gravel driveway at random hours of the night. I would see Chris's car sitting down the end of my parents' road, under the streetlight, before I would go to bed. The stalking progressed to where I could hear him standing outside my ranch slider, talking to someone and then trying to jiggle open the garage door and walk around on the gravel. Things began to really become scary for me when I would receive phone calls and texts from a random number during class about how this person was watching me as I would walk to the bus every morning, and what my parents were doing throughout the day, and threats with things like how they were going to break into my house and assault me and hide my body somewhere deep in the forest where no one would ever find me. At this time, I was sitting my end of the year exams and preparing for university applications and feeding all sorts of information to my friend who we shall call Julia. She, unknown to me, had been spending more time with Chris since the first introduction when we gave her a lift to school. This was a fatal mistake on my behalf because she knew exactly where I was going to be, what my timetables were, and when I would most likely be alone and an easy target for Chris to find me. They began to date, and the texts became more frequent from both of them. Even an attempt to harm me one evening when I was staying late with people from my drama class, working on our final performance for the year, and would be alone in an easy accessible classroom till about 10 p.m. Some of my classmates noticed his car parked across the road from where our classroom was and said it looked like there was two figures sitting inside the car, waiting for me to come out. I freaked and rang my mom and informed her. She came and collected me and took me home, watching the road to make sure they hadn't followed us. This stuff really hit the fan when I became so scared that I had to go to the police about the messages I received and the fact that there was someone coming onto the property to break in and harm me or my parents. Chris carried weapons in his car because he liked to hunt, and I knew it was also for security purposes because he was in the underground world of drugs. Once, I had lodged a formal complaint against Chris and informed the police of his weapons he had on his person and in his home, so the police went around and had a look for anything, but they found nothing, which sent him off even more. That evening, he sat down at the end of the road as per usual and waited for all the lights to go out. Then he came up along the front paddocks of the house and up the driveway. I was sleeping in my parents' living room, which is right beside the driveway with big open windows and ranch sliders to my brother's room. I heard him walk along the side of the house on the driveway and towards my flat. Thinking I was in there, I heard the sound of a gun being cocked. I sat up for a moment, thinking, what should I do? I commando crawled down the hallway to my parents' room and quietly said to my mom, "Someone's outside. Mom, get up. There's someone outside." My dad bolted upright, grabbed his robe and his .22 rifle and ran out of the kitchen door, setting off the sensor light and bolting down the driveway, chasing after something, running through the information paddock. After that night, things calmed down for about a month, till I was packing up to move 10 hours away to a new city. The night after I left, my mom rang to say someone had been in my house and had walked in with muddy boots on because there was rather large footprints all through the house, as if someone was trying to scope the place out. Odd things would happen at my parents' place, like trees would get cut down in the middle of the night, or a car would drive super slow past with its lights all off at odd hours of the night. Things started happening to me down at my new apartment. Each morning, when I would go out there would be a car always parked across the road, with windows tinted, watching me, and I would receive voicemails of a violent nature from private numbers. This kept up till late last year when it all stopped. No phone calls, no sightings of random cars, no odd things going on at my parents'. Every time I go home, I never tell anyone when I'm leaving and when I'll be back at my parents' place for my own safety. I get flashbacks when I hear something like a car backfire or I see a car similar to Chris's driving around. I always keep my home address private and my phone number restricted for my own safety because he was always hunting for me and I don't want to put other people at risk. I always say to my mom, if I go missing, we know where to start looking. Side note, I want to thank you for reading this. I wanted to get my story out there for the safety of others and to share something that has plagued myself and my family for years. I needed to share this in case something should ever happen to me, God forbid, because I know some things I was not meant to know about and has made me a target for some dangerous people. Thank you once again. Update. So this was originally written at the end of 2015 and kept private because there had been a spark of activity. I had traveled home for the Christmas period. I was due for major surgery in January, which meant I couldn't spend time with friends or family after it, along with a death in the family. Stupidly, my sister had said to a few friends who are well known for not keeping their mouths shut and say Julia on a regular basis that I was going to be home till the mid of Jan. I wasn't exactly at my parents' home till the end of Jan, but my father had an encounter with Chris. First time in 3 years we had seen him, and he had pulled up alongside one of the fences and stuck his head out of his window. This is normal to have people talking to my dad from their cars. Because we live in such a small rural area, we are rather close with our neighbors who are all a fair distance away. He stuck his head out and asked if I was around and that I was an old friend. My dad clicked instantly to who it was and said, if he didn't leave right away now, he's going to grab his gun, and that's the end of it. Chris laughed and said, we both know you won't be doing that before I put 2 bullets in your head. Now where is she? My dad, thinking on his feet, said, I was in the hospital 3 hours away, and I'm now living in the biggest city north of my parents' house. He thanked my dad and said for him to watch his back. My dad didn't tell me this when I came home for recovery because he didn't want to stress me out, but I changed my cell phone number and made sure my social media was extremely tight with no geotags or anything that could give away where I am. It's scary to know that someone still holds a grudge to this day because I know some extremely sensitive information about him. I'm a 13-year-old female, and it was only a few months ago when this happened. I was on a hockey trip with the rest of my family. I don't play, but my siblings do. I'm generally a quiet person. I have social anxiety and don't react well to situations with people complimenting me or anything. My family had just pulled into a rest stop I was already familiar with. I was walking in to go get a drink with my little sister, who is 9, when she ran ahead of me. I didn't care much, but I wished she had stayed by my side, because not even a few seconds later, a Caucasian man who looked to be in his mid-40s honked his horn at me. I instantly jumped back, because I was right next to his car, which was a red 4-door sedan. He started telling me how pretty I was and how I should hop into their car. Being the unsocial person I am, I walked away with no reply. I ran inside to go meet up with my little sister. I'm pretty close with her, so I laughed about what just happened and told her. We didn't think much of it and left as soon as we came. The man made crude gestures to me as I walked back to my older siblings. I have 2 sisters and 1 brother. My brother is pretty intimidating and 16, while my older sister is 15 and not intimidating. They both play hockey and are stronger than me. My family drove off and started to go to the hotel we were staying at. It was an hour or 2 away, so after a while, we stopped at another rest stop so me and my siblings could stretch. I had already forgotten about the encounter with the man when I noticed a car pull in. It was a red 4-door sedan. I didn't mind much attention to it at first until I walked into the restroom area. A man followed me in and just sat on the bench like he was waiting for someone. Wanting to avoid eye contact or talking, I pulled my little sister next to me and just spoke about video games with her. I waited until she was done to walk out with her, but my mom walked in and told me to go back to the car. I always avoid talking to strangers, and I get really nervous if someone even says hi to me, so I avoid any contact with people. As I was walking back out, the man followed me. He was around the same height as me. I'm 5'8". He walked next to me and whispered into my ear something along the lines of, "You would look good tied to my bed." I don't completely remember what he said. I just tensed up and ran for my car, jumping into the back seat. I was scared now, but because I was an idiot, I only texted my friend about it. She told me it was some random creep and to not worry about it. I did as she said and forgot about it. I thought that was it for the encounters. Once my family got to our hotel, we only checked in and went right to the ice rink. We took longer than we thought, so we had to be at the rink immediately. I began to forget about the man again. It was the start of the second period, and I was sitting outside the actual rink with my sister. I don't bother watching, at least not until now. My sister and I were playing some multiplayer game when a man sat right next to me and asked me what I was playing. I got extremely uncomfortable and moved away, only to have him move closer. He began asking me if I had a boyfriend, and I just pointed to my ear to pretend I was deaf. It was pretty stupid looking back, but I had a plan if he believed me. I don't know much sign language, but I know enough to pass a lie. Sadly, he didn't buy it and continued to ask. I stayed silent, ignoring him, until he put his cold hand on my thigh. I was wearing leggings, so I felt how cold his hand was. I jumped at it, and he in turn squeezed it. In the game my sister and I were playing, we could message things, so I quickly looked at her and wrote in the chat of our game, "Asked me to go to the bathroom with you." She looked at me and realized what was going on. She walked over to me and told me she had to go to the bathroom. We hid in the bathroom for a while until the game was over. I didn't see him till the next game was going, which was the next day. My sister had a fever the day the game was, so I volunteered to stay with her at our hotel. I only really did it to avoid the man again. It was a few minutes later and I heard a knock at the door. At this time, my little sister was downstairs getting breakfast from the hotel. I assumed it was her and opened the door. I hated what I saw instead of my sister. It was the same man as before. I was horrified. His face had a horrible grin on it. Before he could say anything, I slammed the door and decided it was a good time to call the police. I was crying at that point as I sat against the door and called the police. They arrived shortly after, and the man was arrested. It turns out he had been taking pictures of me the whole trip. He'd been following me the whole time, even when I was swimming with my siblings. From then on, I don't ever walk alone. I hate it. I just really, really hope to never see him again. It was the second scariest thing in my life. This story didn't happen to me. It happened to my mom. I was just scrolling around on another spooky readers channel. Sorry, Unit 522. Please don't hate me. When I saw a video called Creepy College Stalker Stories. That title immediately caused me to remember something my mom once told me. I was a lot younger at the time, about 12 to 13, so I didn't think of it much. My mother is not 55 years old, and I'm currently 17. Now that I come to think about it, her story is a lot creepier than I first thought. I recall what caused her to start talking about this event, but let's go. Let me start off first by saying, at the time of this story, my mother was going to college at Texas Tech. She was getting a law degree. I forgot which year she was in. One night, my mom was walking back from her tennis team's practice, thinking that she was all alone. There was no one on the streets and the streetlights were on. At one point, she started to feel suddenly uneasy and decided to take a glance behind herself. What she saw made her become very wary. A tall, large man was walking behind her just a few meters away. I recall her mentioning that it wasn't strange to see another young adult walking around at night, but this person didn't seem very young. Judging by this man's build, she estimated he was around 30 to 50 years old. It definitely was not a college professor, since most of them aren't out at this time of the night and are much shorter than this man was. Just to double check that this was just a normal pedestrian and not a creeper, my mother decided to pick up the pace. She was now speed walking down the street. A loud sound of shoes hitting the ground behind her caused her to turn around and see the tall man who was now sprinting towards her. Noping the heck out of there, my mom booked it. Due to her being very athletic, she managed to stay a good 5-7 meters ahead of the guy. He too was quite fast. Taking a sharp turn around the corner and running into her apartment building, her apartment was on the ground floor. She quickly unlocked the door, ran inside, and locked it. My mom didn't turn on the light, so the man wouldn't think that she was in there. Next to the door, there were 2 large windows with see-through curtains. Peeking through the window, she saw the man approaching her apartment. Thinking quickly, my mom purposely fell to the floor and shuffled next to the wall, laying there so, in case he were to look in, he wouldn't see her. Yup, that's exactly what he did. Apparently, his shadow could be seen through the curtains as he leered in. The guy stayed there for what seemed to be like 20 to 30 minutes before backing away. A note was slipped under her door, and then he was gone. My mom didn't get up until she knew for a fact that he was indeed gone. Getting up and looking around, she double-checked to make sure the man was gone. He was definitely gone. Feeling relieved that the guy had left, my mother decided to see what was on the paper. The piece of paper was blank, with a few words written largely in the middle. The note read, "A hard man is good to find." Apparently the creep had revered an old saying, "A good man is hard to find," to that. Yeah, my mom went to the police the next day and filed a report. They took her statement in the notes and said they keep an eye out. I don't recall if she told me about the guy and if he was caught, but the world will never know. Basic info about me. I'm currently a 17-year-old female who gets mistaken as a 21 to 24-year-old since I got into university early. Forgive me if I mess up on my English some, it's my second language. First of all, let me start by saying that I'm used to being stalked. I guess, since I have the face of a child, but the height of an adult that attracts creepers, I'm so used to it. I've actually made a system on how I can check if the stalker is dangerous or not. The story happened about 4 to 5 months ago. I was a student at a university in Marbella, Spain. At the time this incident happened, I'm the kind of person who likes to get to class before everyone else to set up pranks. One day, as I was walking to the university early in the morning, I was listening to music when I heard the sound of a car creeping behind me. There weren't any sidewalks, causing the students to walk on the side if not in the middle of the road. Thinking it was a car that wanted to get by to go to work or something, I moved aside. I pulled out my earplugs just as a safety measure and looked at the driver. The driver was almost leaning out of his window entirely, staring creepily at me. His eyes looked as if they were about to pop out. You know, the eyes of someone who does a whole lot of drugs. Being a little startled by this, I pretended to walk on as if nothing was wrong, occasionally glancing at him. I've seen him around before. He and some of his companions would go up to a lot of the girls and try to talk to them and get them inside their big black car. Some of the girls even caught the men trying to take pictures of them. Every time anyone would pass their small shack of a home where all 4 or 5 men lived, it stunk of weed. Now that I come to think of it, I wonder why the police never did anything about them. I had finally reached the tunnel one has to cross to get to the university trail. It's a run-down road up a hill with nothing but farms around it. So convenient. Still hearing the car creep behind me and getting slower as I got closer to the tunnel. I sprinted as soon as I reached the tunnel, out and onto the trail. I hadn't stopped running till I reached the university's main building. I had looked back and seen the car make a U-turn at the head of the trail and disappeared into the distance. Panting, I tried to open the building's doors. Oh great, it was locked. I pulled out my phone quickly and asked a friend why it was locked at this time. Turns out, drumroll please, it was a holiday today, meaning I got up for no freaking reason. After collecting myself, I walked back down the trail stealthily and glanced around everywhere. The car nor the man was in sight. Relieved, I decided to walk through the tunnel at ease. Once I was back on the road, I heard that familiar car creeping behind me noise. Taking a quick glance behind my shoulder, yep, you guessed it. It was the creeper guy, still staring, still with half his body sticking out the window. Thinking quickly, I remembered there was a small fence up ahead, and if one were to jump over it, it would land them right in the forest. A forest with lots of cover that I know like the back of my hand. I jogged up to the fence and leaned against it facing the road and the car. I pulled up my phone and pretended texting someone, while I was actually filming the guy's actions. The man's car almost came to a halt, and I was ready. Oh, did I forget to mention that I'm a blue belt in Taekwondo too? Oops. The man seemed as if he was about to open his door when another car came up behind him. This car seemed to be perfectly normal. In fact, the driver wasn't too happy about my stalker's car driving so slowly. More and more cars began piling up behind Mr. Creeper, forcing him to move on down the road. I watched with a smirk at his face turning into a look of anger at me. The kind of a face a baby would make. I've noticed a lot of stalkers make that face when they fail. I watched him watch me, until he looked away, having to see where he was driving off to. I waited till he turned the corner, knowing that he might make a U-turn again. I sprinted back to my apartment, double checking if I was being watched before I went in. I did see that guy again a couple of occasions. He and his buddies tried to talk to me, even tried to touch my arm as I walked away. I'll just let you imagine what I did. Now that I come to think of it, this is a lot creepier than I originally had viewed it as. Just exactly what were they up to? I am now at a different university that's much better, especially with security. It's online. Thanks for reading this and possibly featuring it in a video. To understand the magnitude of my story, you must know who I am. So, here's a little backstory. I was born in 1954, so my formidable years were spent growing up under the influence of the 60s and early 70s in a very small town in upstate Ohio. When I say small, I mean one light at Broadway in Maine. There were about 40 businesses in the center of town. The drugstore soda shop was right on one of those corners. There was also the hardware store, small grocery store, Ben Franklin's gas station, barbershop. We had Baptist, Methodist, Lutheran, and Catholic churches, and most everyone went to one of them weekly. You get the picture. It was Mayberry. We also had a library, a post office, and the jail. The jail was set up so you could easily sneak right past the cop desk 9 times out of 10 to go see if anyone was in jail. If there was, we would run errands for them, go get cigarettes, whatever. We never bothered to ask, "What are you in for?" I was a curious, free-spirited, and completely wild and innocent child. A little bit later came the assassination of JFK, the civil rights movement, the Vietnam protests, then the hippie revolution, which I joined in becoming one of the earliest hippies, so maybe you can guess where the story is leading. Hitchhiking was commonplace in those years, so I did it a lot. For a little over 3 years, I made many trips all over the US and Canada, much to the dismay of my mother. Sometimes I took friends, sometimes I went alone. Always with no money, no clothes, and no worries. So many people tried to warn me of the dangers, but being very young and naive, and feeling quite invincible, I ignored all of their well-meaning advice. This wasn't my first trip, nor was it the last, but it was the most memorable, and you'll now understand the gravity of the very close call that it was. June 1969. I was 14. I was spending the night with my friend Dina, who lived in a neighboring mirrored town. I talked her into coming with me to San Francisco. She just happened to have a brother living out there that she had not seen in a while. So we headed out across the cow pasture to the highway and stuck out our thumbs. It never took long to get a ride, as you can probably imagine. We received many rides. A band tour bus picked us up on their way to a big gig in Chicago, but we didn't want to make that big of a detour, so we passed. I can't remember who the band was. I remember another ride when we got into a convertible Cadillac with 4 black men and went to a party in Blacktown, Columbus, Ohio. We were the only white people at this party, and let me tell you, we had a blast. I never felt unwanted or in danger. In fact, the nice lady that lived in that apartment gave me a shirt which I thought was so kind. Now, as an adult, I realized she was trying to cover me up. God bless her. The next ride was pretty cool, until he picked up another hitchhiker, a lone guy, who kept nagging him about how much trouble he was going to be in if he got caught taking these 2 underage girls across state lines. I became very agitated and told him to shut up. We should have gone out right then and there, but we stayed. He wasn't dangerous, just annoying. Well, the driver stopped for gas in Iowa, and Dina and I went into the restroom to freshen up. When we came out, the cops were waiting for us, and we ended up in the Iowa City Jail. I'm sure our parents were contacted immediately, although I do not recall. We were quite the attraction in this little jail. The cops would come up and talk to us and play cards. They would bring us cigarettes, candy, and donuts, another Mayberry. I don't think we were there for too long before Dina's mom had driven out to pick us up, and after a conversation with her daughter, she just decided to drive us the rest of the way to California. That's just over 1,900 miles. Unbelievable. I remember singing to the radio all the way to Nevada. I especially remember the mamas and the papas, "Are you going to San Francisco?" Later we booked into a hotel in Reno. Boring. This is not what I signed up for. I tried to talk to Dina into just taking off. I realize now, as an adult, what a terrible selfish act that would have been, and how devastating that would have been to her mom. Lucky for everyone, she refused to do that, so I stayed. We finally ended up in San Francisco, right at Haight and Ashbury near Berkeley College, where all the hippie action was, with her mom tagging along. It was also overwhelming to me. It was pretty cool for our little town, but this stuff was way out of my league. I was not fully aware of things like drug addiction, but I was firsthand at Needle Park. Seeing everyone strung out on drugs scared me to death. I saw other things too that I cannot mention. Needless to say, I was shocked. I wanted to go home, and I have never wanted to go back to California again, and have never been back even to this day. I don't remember how many weeks I was gone on that particular adventure, but shortly thereafter, I was home watching TV with my mom. It was July, and it was all over the news about the Manson family and the infamous murders. I then realized how close I had come to being picked up by them and possibly becoming one of the family. What if I would have been taken off on my own, looking for adventure, and not stayed with Dina and her mom that night? Hitchhiking alone through the desert, 9 hours away from Spawn Ranch? What if that guy had not turned us into the cops in Iowa, and we would have been out there, just the two of us? Most assuredly, I, or both of us, would have gotten picked up by one of them. Later I found out that the family were recruiting people from Haight and Ashbury, and also how irked I was because we couldn't lose her mom. Every day I'm thankful that I did not get caught up in that. I was sure ripe for the picking, especially if they would have gotten a hold of me before I made it all the way to California. In all my adventures, I was never beat up, assaulted, or murdered. I really do believe that I was under divine protection.